Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video of the series API testing using Postman. In today's video, we will create our first API GET request. We will then understand the response which we have received back from the server. Then we will create another API request for GET method using parameters, and we will also understand the status codes. So without further ado, let's go back to our Postman interface. So we went through the interface features in our last session. If you haven't watched that, then please watch that one first. So over here, we will create a request and we will get this window over here. And by default, we are getting our get HTTP method, and that's what we will be using in today's video. Now we have to enter a request URL, which will be basically the endpoint for our API. So you can use any public API for that. I will be using this recrest.in. You can also use gorest.co.in, and there are many others. So for practice, you can use either of them. Right. Okay. So we will go back here and we will write our first request URL, which will be recrest.in API users. Okay, so now we have chosen get method, and what get method is doing, get method basically retrieves data from an API. So whenever we have to retrieve any data from the source, then we will be using get method. Okay, so over here in the request URL, I haven't entered HTTP. It's optional. We can enter HTTP. If we haven't entered, then it will add it by itself. So that's why I haven't added right now. Okay, so we have got our request URL. We have got our method. If we are adding any parameters, etc., any headers, then we can add that as well. But for now, we are not doing that. So what we will do, we will just press send button over here. And in the lower pane, we have received a response. Okay, so let's understand that what actually is happening over here. So let's go back to our PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so what happened when we sent a get request? Okay, so we sent a request using Postman to the API server. The API server, which is in this case is reqres.in, it received the request and it returned a response. And at the end, Postman, it received the response and it displayed it in the interface. So by default, JSON data response is shown in the lower pane, which we can see over here. So in the response now, let's try to understand it a little bit more. So we can see there are a few components of the response. The main ones are body, headers, status code, etc. In body, we can see by default we have got a JSON format, and this one is pretty. So what does pretty means, that the code over here, which we can see over here, it is in an easy to read format where different keywords are colored differently. As you can see, the different keywords are colored differently, and it makes it easy to read. Okay, so and by default we have got it in JSON format. It can be in XML, HTML, text, etc. as well, but by default it's in JSON. Okay, and the second option over here under the body we can see is raw. So now in this option the code is the same as it was in pretty, but it is displayed in a single line and there are no colors. So you can see that now you can differentiate that in this format it's easy, because easy to read because of all the indentation and the different keyword colors, etc. While in raw there still is the same data, but it's in a raw format. Okay, and then in preview we can see that the code is shown, the preview of the page basically is shown over here. So right now we don't have any graphical format for this one. For that one, what we can do, we can have another one where I can show you. So I have just entered google.com, and if we will send the request, and now if we will go to the preview, we can see that it's showing us the preview of that that page. So this is for to show you that how the preview looks. For the one which we entered earlier, preview looks something like this. Okay, so now let's move on to visualize. Okay, over here we can see that it can't visualize the response. Okay, so what is visualize? So visualizer, basically in Postman we are given an option to visually represent the responses. Right now we can't see anything over here because to enable this we have to write a visualization code to the pre-request script or the test script over here of the request. When we are sending the request, we have to add that visualization code. In this case we haven't added it, so that's why it's not showing over here. But in our other later on examples we will cover this as well. So then I will show you that how a visualizer works. Okay, so this was the body, and now let's go through the save response as well, that what the save response does over here. We can see this button over here, save response. If we click, we can see that there are two options. One is save to a file, that we can save this response to a file, and the other option is disabled right now, which is save as example. Okay, so what save this example does, that if we have saved our request in a collection, we did cover collection last time, that collection is basically the grouping of the APIs. So we can create a request over collection over here, let's say users, and we have saved this request in the collection which is known as users. We can see it over here as well. Okay, so what is done, that now we have saved it in the collection, and now whenever we will be saving any response for that request, it will be saved over there. Now we can see, we can also see this option save as example as enabled. So we will go here, we will save it, right? And now if we go back to this one, we will see that now the responses which we have saved for a request will be available as an example. So whenever that request will be selected, we will also get a drop that response which is saved for that request as an example over here. So from over here we can always go back and we can see the response for the saved request as well. It will appear only if we have saved our request in a collection. So I hope that this part is clear. Okay, moving on to the next one, which are headers. Okay, so headers are basically we have headers for both request and for response as well. And over here we have different information, like for example we have the cache status, etc., the server details, content encoding, etc. So we have all these details in the headers tab. Okay, and there is also a method type as head, which we will cover later. If we have this one, then by default Postman will show you the headers tab over here, over here in the response. Okay, now moving on to another one, you can see this network icon over here. So this, as the name says, it shows the network information. Network data is shown when API returns a response. It will display the local and remote IP details, etc. As we can see, we can also see that there is a certificate detail given over here as well. And when we make a HTTP request, then we can see a padlock sign. So we can see that there is a padlock sign over here because in this case we sent an HTTP request, and that's why we have also been given a certificate detail, etc. as well. Okay, so this was the network information. Then we also have a status code over here. Okay, so we will cover all the status codes in detail. I will give you an overview of all the details, but this is for now. We have got it as 200 OK, and 200 OK, it means that the endpoint is correct and we have received the required results. So whenever we get 200 as our response code, it means that the request was successful. And then the next one, we have response time. Okay, so response time, it shows the time it took for the response to be received from the server, and it is quite useful metric for performance. And then we have response size over here. So response size, basically Postman breaks down the response size into body and headers, and these are the approximate sizes. So now coming back over here, we also see cookies option over here. So it basically shows the cookies which are sent by the server. There is also a Chrome app interceptor extension which we will be using later on, and that app is basically used for managing cookies, so we will be covering that as well later on. Coming back to the test results, there are no test results for this request because of course we didn't entered any test as part of our request for the specific request. But over here we can see the results of the test which we run against the request. If we have any test, then we will see the results over here. Right, okay, so this basically covers the entire response. Okay, so now let's cover the parameters. So now in this case we have sent a request. We created our first GET request where we didn't enter any parameters. Now let's go ahead and understand the parameters as well. So we can send two kind of parameters. We can send query parameters and we can send path parameters with the request using the URL field, or we can also use the params tab as well. Okay, so what are the query parameters? Query parameters are added at the end of the request URL following a question mark sign. Right, so question mark sign, and of course if there are multiple parameters then we can add an amp sign as well, but for now let's do only one. Okay, so what we will do, we will add a parameter, a query parameter now. So we have added our question mark sign and then we will enter page is equal to 2. So you would see that as we entered this in the request URL, over here in param section, it has picked that as a key. I have also added the value as well, right? And we can also add a description as well, like we can add anything which can be used for the API documentation, etc. Whatever the details we want to add, we can write it in the description as well. Okay, so now what we are doing, we are sending a parameter over here, query parameter, and when we will press send, we have got a positive response. And over here, as you can see, that now we can see all the usernames, all the users on the page 2. So earlier we were just shown the first page by default. Now because we have passed this parameter, we are seeing all the users which are on page 2. So in total there were 12 users, and per page it was showing 6. By default it was showing us the first page, and now we have got the second page because we have given this specifically in our query parameter. Okay, so I hope that this part is clear as well. And now we have to understand the path parameter. So to send a path parameter, basically we enter the parameter name into the URL field after a colon. So instead of this, we will be using, instead of question mark, we will be using a colon and then what we want to retrieve. So any colons on a path basically denotes a variable. Let's try this. So you can see that we have got the path variable over here, page, but there is no value, so it has by default shown us the first page. If we enter the value 2 and then try sending it, now it has sent us the ID 2. So that's how it's now giving us the second ID, all the details, what's the first name, last name, etc. And just like the query one, in path variable as well, we can add the description to the parameters as well, and they will appear for anyone who is like sharing the request or viewing your API documentation, etc. So when it comes to parameters, we can say that in path is basically required to access the resource, any specific resource, and the query parameter is basically if we want to filter anything. So I hope that this part is clear as well, and now we can move on to the last part, which I said earlier, that we will understand the status codes. So status code 200, we know that whenever the request is successful, we get a successful response, then this is what we are looking for, 200. Okay, all right, let's go back here and let's understand our other status codes which are available. Okay, so we will get the status codes in one of these format. If we are getting something 1XX, means like something 100 or 101, then starting from 1 is basically an informational status code. It means that the request has been received and understood. So we have like 100, which means continue, and then we also have the status codes which are starting from 2, which means successful. It means that the action requested by the client was received, it was understood, and it was accepted as well. So this is what we are which we just covered, which was 200. Okay, which means the request is okay. Similarly, we can also have 201, which means created, that the request is complete and a new resource is created. So these are only few examples, we have lots others as well. Then we have a status code which is starting from with 3, so which means redirection. So it means that further action is required in order to complete the request. For example, we have 302 as known as found. It means that the requested page has moved temporarily to a new URL. Then any status code which is starting with 400 something, it shows the client error. That error was caused by the client. Like many times you would have seen the 400, which shows bad request, that the server did not understand the request which was sent. Then there is 403, which means forbidden, that the access is forbidden to the requested page. So then at the end we have the status code starting with 500, which shows the server error. So it means that the server failed to fulfill a request. So the most common one which we know is the 500, which is the internal server error. It means that the request was not completed and the server met an unexpected condition, and that's why it displays the 500, which is the internal server error. Similarly, we have 502 code, which is for bad gateway, which means that the server received an invalid response from from the server. Okay, so these are only few of them. There are many further examples, but these are the 5 main starting of the status codes: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And based on the starting number, you can interpret that what kind of status code it is, and what are we expecting, what's the server is trying to tell us as a response code. Okay, so with this, now we are coming to the end of today's video. As an assignment, I would like to request that, just like we created a GET request today, you also create your own GET request, and you can use the APIs which I have used, or you can use any other public APIs, and try to play around with the GET request and with and without parameters, and then see the response you are getting, and try to understand that. And if there are any questions and you didn't understand something, then please leave the comment below, or you can also leave a comment in our Facebook group as well. So if you have found today's session useful, then please like and share the video, and also consider subscribing to the channel. I'll see you in the next video. Till then,